Some of you may recognize this, and then maybe some of you may not recognize it, but it's a prop that I have used for a good number of years in my priesthood. And every once in a while, I like to bring it out because it is a great visual. And what it is, it's simply a piece of length of garden hose, and it's all tied up in knots. And, you know, this hose is meant for water to flow through it. And you know what happens when your garden hose gets kinked up. It restricts the flow of water, and depending how bad the kink is or the knot is, it completely could cut off the flow of water. And I tell you that it's a great visual because it's a symbol. It's a symbol for us, for me, for you. Because just as this hose is a vessel that water is supposed to flow through, you and I are vessels that grace is supposed to flow through. But oftentimes, like this hose, we get all knotted up. And sometimes we can actually feel it right in the pit of our stomach. We got knots in our stomach. We just are not doing well. We're not feeling good at all. And so we want to take a pill, or we want to go to the doctor. And sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. Because the root of the problem has nothing to do with a pill. It has everything to do with our relationship with God and with one another. And so like this hose, we get all knotted up. And if you listen closely, especially in the first reading, you see there's a big knot that took place there. Stephen was martyred at the hands of Saul, who was Paul, and who was doing it in the name of God. Can you imagine that? Talk about a knot. And then there was the gospel where at the Last Supper, Jesus prays this prayer, which we call the great high priestly prayer. And he prays for unity among his apostles, that no division would come between them, that they would be the ones who would bring Christ to the world. And in bringing Christ to the world, they would bring peace and joy to the world. How are we doing? We doing okay with that? No? Yes? No. Are you asleep? It's 9:20. We're not doing so hot with that. Humanity is all knotted up. You know, it wasn't too long ago that we were all waiting for that white smoke to come out of the chimney. And we were anxious to find out who the new pope was going to be. Oh, everybody had their ideas, and there was all kinds of speculation. The bets were on, the bets were off. And then finally, the time came, and his name was announced, Francis. No one in the history of the papacy had ever dared take the name of Francis because of what the name symbolized and what it pointed to. And shortly after his name was announced, out he came, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis I. And then he stood there and just looked. He didn't wave. He didn't have a big speech, no fancy words. He just stood there and looked. at the thousands of people. And then he did something very interesting. He invoked the Blessed Mother. You know, this Pope, he's a simple man. There's nothing pretentious about him. He's not a big talker. And he's got very simple spirituality, very devotional, this Pope. Prays his rosary every day. And so the first thing that he did when he was being presented to the world as our new Pope, he invokes the Blessed Mother under the title Mary, Undoer of Knots. And a lot of people said, who's that? What's that about? Mary, Undoer of Knots. And then the following day, he went to St. Mary Major, and he dedicated the Diocese of Rome to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And tomorrow, which is May 13th, it's the feast of Our Lady of Fatima, he is consecrating and dedicating his pontificate to Our Lady of Fatima. I like this Pope. I like what I see. I like what I hear. And so he sees humanity full of knots, and he invokes the Blessed Virgin Mary under the title Mary, Undoer of Knots. Not a new devotion, been around for about 300 years. And it was originally inspired from a meditation from Saint Irenaeus, who was the Bishop of Lyon, and he was martyred in the year 202. And the devotion is inspired by his understanding that Eve, who by her disobedience tied the knot of disgrace for the human race, Mary, our mother, by her obedience, untied the knot. Mary, by her obedience, untied the knot. And so you might say to me, well, what the heck are these knots that she's untying? They're the problems and they're the struggles which we face, in which we do not see any solution. They're the knots of discord in our families. They're the knots of lack of understanding between parents and children. They're the knots of disrespect and violence. They're the knots of deep hurts between husbands and wives. They're the knots of the absence of peace and joy in our homes. They're also the knots of anguish and despair of separated couples, of the breakup and the destruction of our families. They're the knots of the drug addict son or daughter, the sick or separated from home or from God. They're the knots of alcoholism. They're the knots of the practice of abortion, of depression, of unemployment, of fear, and of solitude. They are the knots in all our lives. And how they suffocate the soul, and how they beat us down, and how they betray the hearts and joy and peace which separate us from God and from one another. Mary, undoer of knots. This Pope is on to something. This Pope is on to something because as he looked out at the sea of humanity in St. Peter's Square and was looking into the eyes and into the lives of all of those people, he saw all that stuff. And in seeing all that stuff, he also saw this is as good as we can do. This is as good as it gets on our own. I asked you, how are we doing with all that stuff? And you said, not so hot, Father. 2,000 years since Jesus prayed that prayer for unity. We ain't doing so hot. And so this Pope invokes the intercession of a mother, like only mothers can for their children. Because there's something special about a mother's love. I'm a dad. But you know, dads, as much as we love our kids, we don't understand a mother's love. We don't know what it means to carry children for 9 months. Most of us don't know what it means to care for a child you give birth to. Get up at night, change diapers, feed. First day at school. This Pope invoked the intercession and the love of a mother for you, for me. And so what better time for you and I to do the same? To pray a novena to Mary, undoer of knots, that we would ask her to intercede for us with her Son. Why a novena? Because Mary spent 9 days in the midst of the apostles between the Ascension and Pentecost, waiting for a great outpouring of the Spirit upon the church. And oh my gosh, do we need that today? What better time to do it than in the month of May, the month of Mary? What better day to start than today, Mother's Day? You see, I told you, this is a symbol for you and I. This is what sin does in our lives. Tell me, how is grace supposed to flow through this? Mary, undoer of knots, pray for us who have recourse to thee.